In studio right now is Tom Carcone from the Utica Fire Department. And Thomas, yesterday we talked a little. Thomas, okay, I don't want to. William always bothers me. I had an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the selection of the fire chief. And you are a wealth of knowledge. Like, you know your stuff. So where are you on this? And where's the fire department? The fact is it the issue that the city's reaching outside the fire department?
Reaching outside for advisory board.
Okay.
I don't know too many details on the advisory board itself.
Right.
But we've had a long historical history here of having problems with disappointment for some reason.
Yeah.
We've been without a chief for about 2.5 years now, 2 years. They removed Chief Brooks, obviously under Article 72, saying he wasn't fit for duty because of a non-related work-related illness or injury. Civil Service actually took that action, Article 72. It was actually strange because at the meeting that they discussed it, they said that who made the decision ultimately, and they referenced Lori Robel, who's the secretary for the Civil Service Commission, which I don't know how that happens.
Right. Do you? And again, if I ask you any questions that you feel are something, well, I learned yesterday, if I go off base, you will let me know. And you might take me out. Don't do that. The fact is, do you think it was political, the Chief Brooks thing, or do you not want to get into that?
Do I think it was political?
I mean, from a union standpoint.
We don't represent the chief. It'd be unfair
right.
for me to talk about that.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's my understanding it was clear for administrative duties. They removed him from that position without a plan in place. And
that's the big issue.
Which was the beginning of a rolling ball of issues.
Which completely affects all firefighters.
Today.
Right.
Our functionality, absolutely.
Right, yeah.
I mean, without a chief, obviously, it makes it more difficult for us to perform our jobs underneath.
Okay. Fair enough.
And after Chief Brooks was relieved, we went, I think it was 3 months without a chief. They held a council meeting. George Clark said at the council meeting, I'll do the duties of both. That's unacceptable. We need an assistant chief as much as we need a chief. Those are two highest paid, highest responsibility jobs.
Yeah.
The council demanded that they make a chief. Ultimately, the chief made temporary appointment we actually had a list of 2 people at that time of qualified candidates. One was the highest. One was one of the highest in the state. They threw those 2 people on that list out. Made a temporary appointment for John Kelly. I think he served for 4 months. That didn't work out. They ultimately he actually voluntarily demoted, took a step back. At that point, I don't know if they asked George Clark or if he wasn't asked or asked, but ultimately he retired. He didn't serve as our new chief. They then made interim chief Jim Barefoot, who was retired as a captain. Never served as chief before, never served as deputy chief or assistant chief in the administrative positions, and they actually brought back a retired captain to fill the slot for a 3-month period. Now, he couldn't serve for more than 3 months. This was another exercise of the civil service process.
Okay.
And this is where we get into the buffer.
So there are a lot of rules that go into play, civil service rules that are in play here that are dictating a lot of what's going on.
They're existing. They're very rarely practiced. And in the city of Utica, it seems to want to exhaust every single one of the civil service rules.
Okay. Are we not looking forward? I mean, if you're going to appoint somebody, and you should look forward to realize that in 3 months he can't continue to do this.
That's correct. Yeah. So they brought him back anyway, and he served for a 3-month period. Then they, under a temporary appointment of civil service law, during that time frame, he tried to exercise another civil service law by requesting open competitive testing. That was unsuccessful. One of the chair people.
Explain what that is, could you please?
So, open competitive testing is where they would look to anybody outside the department. It would be open to anybody within the state or nation, whatever they want to open
it up to. And for this visit, you're against it. You're clearly against this.
Absolutely. How could you have somebody come in and run our department that hasn't worked in it?
Right.
This is similar to like when the police brought back Chief Pileman. But we were against it. We took our stance against it. Ultimately, the Civil Service Commission voted against it. One of the Civil Service Commissioners actually stepped down after that because he wasn't happy on how the Civil Service, was being utilized. They then reappointed somebody else to the Civil Service Commission. But we went forward. We were successful in getting simultaneous testing, which means they hold one open competitive and one promotional, but by state law, the promotional take precedence, and it's not until the promotional exhausted before they could go open competitive.
Yeah.
So that was a success, regardless of the mayor's request. So after that, Jim Barefoot served for his 3-month period by civil service law, and then they moved on and they appointed assistant chief who took George Clark's position after his retirement. They promoted assistant chief Scott Ingersoll to temporary provisional fire chief.
Right. Yeah.
And then ultimately, and this is where it gets sticky, they attempted to reinstate George Clark to assistant chief to fill the temporary vacancy of provisional chief Ingersoll.
Now, as a layman just sitting and listening to this is extremely confusing.
Yeah, I know.
And I got to say, there seems to be a better way that this all could have been handled.
Well, there could have been a plan. There's clearly no plan.
And that's where the confusion comes in.
And we're going by the seat of our pants here.
Yeah.
Now you're bringing back a guy that retired in April to come back. This is the first time we don't have a problem with Jim Barefoot working in the chief's position because the chief is non-union.
Right.
The assistant chief is a union position. This is the first time in 120 years of the Utica Fire Department that we had a civilian, because he was retired, coming back to serve as an interim temporary assistant chief within our department.
Why not bring someone on?
The reinstatement was unsuccessful because Chief Inger still held his position.
Okay.
So it could only be a temporary appointment. So they tried to reinstate him. Civil Service ruled that they made a mistake. They had to go back and rectify the reinstatement and change it to a temporary appointment. Now, that's a temporary appointment of a civilian.
Yeah.
And that's the first time we've had a non-permanent employee coming back to fulfill a union position, which was a serious issue.
Yeah.
So then we went forward, and he was only supposed to serve 3 months under temporary appointment, just like Jim Barefoot. They challenged that, and they knew by the time we got to court that his 6-month period would be done. So he retired in April, got his full pension, made an additional $30,000 for the end of that year, another additional $30,000 for the next year, $60,000 on top of his full pension. Then they went on, and he just left last month. We're waiting for the results to come back for the new test. So the new test is coming back. Now, you had 2 guys that you already threw away the test that were already on that that list. So, 5 guys took the test from within our department for a promotional exam. 0 took it for open competitive, which was what they wanted before.
Yeah.
So you got 2 out of the 5 that have already taken the test. 1 was in the highest in the state.
Yeah.
And here you are. I guess you didn't accept them then. So what do you have? 3 more that possibly could get in that 3rd position, because there's a rule of 3.
Why not accept one of the 2 that took the test?
That's the discretion of the mayor.
Yeah.
So ultimately, you have a new rule of 3. You have to hire within the top 3. So the new test results will be coming back, and an appointment will be made out of those 3.
Now, are those 3 all from within the department?
All 5 took the test.
All 5 are from.
And the top 3 you could hire from.
Okay, fair
or
enough.
promote from.
Yep.
So that being said, you got 2 out of 5 that you've already refused. You have 1 of 3 have to score in the top 3. And now you're bringing back a 10-year retired assistant chief and a interim chief that was a retired captain to be your advisory board as a buffer to the new appointment. It doesn't make sense. It's not necessary. I mean, our assistant chief was separated for 10 years. What does he know about what's going on in the department today?
Yeah.
The other guy doesn't have any experience at all. To put it in perspective, I mean, this is like Dan LaBella was the interim police chief, but he was an investigator before. But he was appointed.
Right.
And then you had Chief Pileman, who was an outside source. This is like the police bringing back Chief Pileman and Dan LaBella to pick the next chief of the police department, whether it be Ed Noonan or one of the other guys, Donnie Cinque, or whatever else, as a buffer to that.
Yeah.
So I think it's unnecessary. I don't think it's Correct. I mean, and I don't understand why they're doing it, unless it's something wrong with it.
Okay, unless it smells a little bit.
Yeah.
Manansky?
Let me ask you, you referred to, I forget which one, as a civilian a couple times. But he's a guy who's worked in the fire department for years, right? What's wrong with getting some input from guys who were in the department for a long time? And
there's absolutely nothing wrong, but you got to look at who you're asking here. You're asking a retired captain that never worked as a deputy chief, assistant chief, or a chief, except for when he was appointed to that position for 3 months. So what is his intricate knowledge on those actual job duties in order to sit in on another person's exam or interview? For instance, if you had an employee that worked here 10 years ago, would you want him sitting on an interview to see if you were qualified for a position that he never held?
right.
I mean, it just doesn't. It doesn't add up.
You were pointing to me. He doesn't want me on any of those commissions.
Another guy that was retired for 10 years. I mean, he wouldn't want somebody 10 years retired coming in and sitting on his interview.
Sure.
Is it better than Joe Schmo from another place coming in and asking questions? Yes, it is. And for that reason, we won't dispute it. But for the other purpose of coming in and mingling with the process of this department moving forward, I find it unnecessary.
Right.
We survived 120 years before. We'll survive 120 years after, and it's always the forward progress that they can't continue to keep coming back and mingling with. It has to take its course, and our new leaders have to take leadership.
I want to bring this home. Is there anything that will change the current path? It doesn't look like there is. Although you could still challenge things in court, and is that what's going on now? Or do we continue going down this road to be one of these 5 that'll be the next chief?
There's going to be no challenge in court for an advisory committee.
Okay.
It's just, why is it necessary?
Right.
And start having some faith in our guys that are there. I mean, these 5 guys that took the test, the mayor promoted, I think, 3 or 4 of them, some of them even twice.
Yeah.
He knows their capabilities.
Yeah.
He claims that he's the public safety commissioner. He's qualified for the position, and we can't make a simplistic appointment without bringing in other people outside of the department or retired from the department, separated 10 years to come back for some purpose or reason. If you're qualified to run the department or be the public safety commissioner on a daily basis, how are you not for a specific day? And there's one other aspect of that. By bringing back George Clark for 6 months, who was retired from the job and didn't take the positions at the time, you took 6 months away from another candidate that was taking that test that could have been serving as a temporary appointment.
Got it.
And you could have saw their qualifications. You could have saw their performance.
Right.
You could have even broke it up in 2 guys for 3 months each, and you could have seen their performance and gave them the opportunity to get experience and everything else. And you just blocked them from that. If you're not willing to see what they're capable of for that 6-month period, and you're not willing to give them that job interview, then why do you need somebody else to give you a job interview for that one specific day?
Do you? Does the union have a position on whether it would be better to have someone different as the public safety commissioner or versus the mayor? Do you guys take a position on that?
It's not the ideal circumstance.
Okay.
And usually the public safety commissioner is somebody that has
knowledge of fire and police, and
labor relations, and those kind of issues, health and safety. I mean, what was it? During Storm Stella, who was the incident command was Dave Short.
Right.
He's the DPW commissioner. I mean, is he qualified in incident command structure, such as like a police chief or a fire chief or a public safety commissioner that has those qualifications? I mean, it's kind of leaving that gaping hole. And that's where we find ourselves a lot of the time, with civil service being the buffer or an advisory committee being a buffer, or this outside investigation of a place from Syracuse coming in for workplace violence.
I want to say your knowledge is incredible, and I have to really move quickly to follow you on it because you know your stuff. Let's get you back again, and I really appreciate it. All right.
Always.
We really appreciate it, Tom Carcone.